Libya is known as one of the driest countries on Earth, where most of the land consists only of flowing sand, rocky terrain, and harsh hot winds. Yet, beneath that arid surface, Libya holds one of the largest freshwater reserves ever discovered by humankind. To awaken this precious resource, an unprecedented engineering marvel was born: the Great Man-Made River. A vast underground pipeline network that carries water from deep within the Sahara to sustain the cities along the Mediterranean coast. Will this project become the eighth wonder of the world, or is it merely a daring gamble with the future? Today, Terran Works tells not just the story of a construction project, but a story of water, power, survival, and the price humanity pays when it dares to reverse the fate of the desert. Let the journey begin. Libya lies along the Mediterranean coast, but don't let that shoreline fool you. Over 90% of the country's territory lies within the Sahara Desert, one of the most extreme arid regions on the planet. Unlike the US with its Mississippi or Colorado rivers, Libya has no permanent rivers. What does exist are dry riverbeds, which only carry water for a few hours after rare rainfall. Across most of Libya, the average annual rainfall is nearly zero. Only a very narrow coastal strip, less than 5% of the country's area, receives more than 100 millimeters of rain per year. The vast remaining land cannot rely on the skies, but must instead depend entirely on groundwater deep beneath the Sahara Desert. This harsh reality has shaped the way Libya survives. The population is densely concentrated along the coast, where infrastructure and water supplies are relatively stable. Meanwhile, the inland regions can only cling to small oases and limited-scale irrigated farming systems. The real turning point came in the mid-20th century. When oil companies drilled deep into the southern Libyan desert in search of oil, they unexpectedly struck something even more valuable: fresh water. Not small, scattered underground pockets, but a massive reservoir locked within layers of sandstone deep beneath the earth. The Nubian Sandstone Aquifer. This aquifer stretches beneath Libya, Egypt, Sudan, and Chad, covering an area of more than 2 million square kilometers. Estimates suggest it holds around 39 million trillion gallons of water. But the greatest value of this water lies not just in its vast quantity, but in its age. This is fossil water, accumulated between 10,000 and over 1 million years ago, during a time when the Sahara was still green, humid, and full of life. As the truth about the Nubian aquifer gradually came to light, Libya faced a major paradox: a country with virtually no surface water, yet possessing a vast underground water reserve. This resource was large enough to change the nation's destiny, but it came with a harsh limitation: it is non-renewable. The question was no longer, is there water, but rather, how will Libya use it? In this context, water quickly moved beyond environmental concerns to become a matter of national strategy. At the time, Libya was oil-rich but isolated, under sanctions, and unwilling to depend on the West, especially on costly, energy-intensive desalination technologies. In this situation, Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi saw the Nubian aquifer not just as a resource, but as the foundation for the country's independence and self-reliance. Instead of bringing water from the sea inland, Libya chose the opposite path: to bring water from deep within the Sahara to sustain cities along the Mediterranean coast. From that decision, the Great Man-Made River was born. In reality, this isn't a river in the natural sense, but a massive network of wells drilled hundreds of meters deep, connected by thousands of kilometers of steel-reinforced concrete pipelines buried beneath the sand. Politically, it was an ambitious declaration of independence, but ecologically and technically, it was also a high-stakes gamble, because Libya was placing its future in an ancient, finite, and slowly depleting water source. To turn that ambition into reality, Libya had to solve a challenge that few nations had ever dared to face: how to transport water across thousands of kilometers of harsh desert, reliably and continuously, for decades. The answer lay in an infrastructure system of unprecedented scale in the history of water management. Over 13,000 wells were drilled about 500 meters deep in the heart of the Sahara Desert, where surface temperatures can exceed 45 degrees Celsius. From these wells, water is channeled into a massive network of reinforced concrete pipes, each weighing tens of tons. The pipes are buried deep beneath the sand and precisely joined using rubber gaskets and high-pressure resistant mortar to minimize leakage and evaporation, water's greatest enemy in the desert. The total length of the entire system exceeds 4,000 kilometers, enough to connect New York to Los Angeles. The cement used to manufacture the pipes alone amounted to 5 million tons, equivalent to the building material for more than 20 Giza pyramids. In theory, it's an engineering marvel, but in practice, every kilometer of pipeline, every gallon of water pumped, also represents Libya betting its future on a system that is massive, complex, and incredibly fragile. Why did Libya avoid desalination? Why would a country bordering the Mediterranean choose to pump water from deep within the desert instead of sourcing it directly from the sea? In the face of water scarcity, desalination might seem like the obvious choice for a country located along the Mediterranean coast, like Libya. But in reality, Libya stayed away from this path for decades. The answer wasn't about technology, it was about cost, energy, and control. Desalination is an extremely electricity-intensive process. To convert seawater into fresh water on a national scale, Libya would need a massive network of plants running continuously, relying on a stable power supply and imported fuel. In the context of sanctions, weak infrastructure, and fragile security, this posed a strategic risk. Not to mention, the operating and maintenance costs of desalination are significantly higher than simply pumping groundwater, especially when that groundwater is already right beneath their feet. Moreover, desalination creates another environmental issue: the discharge of highly concentrated brine back into the sea, which threatens coastal ecosystems. For Libya, that meant trading one water risk for a new ecological one. In the eyes of Libya's leadership at the time, the great man-made river was seen as cheaper, faster, and more self-sufficient. But that choice also meant relying on an ancient, non-renewable water source instead of investing in a more sustainable long-term solution. And that is the hidden cost behind Libya's decision to avoid desalination. When the massive pipelines began operating and water actually flowed through the desert, Libya's challenge shifted from engineering to a much more complex question: who would get to benefit from that water? In a country where water determines life, how it is distributed also means how power is distributed. The first priority was given to coastal cities like Tripoli, Benghazi, and Misrata. Urban centers of population, infrastructure, economic activity, and political authority. Here, water flowed more consistently and reliably, sustaining millions of city dwellers and keeping the country running. But to reach these cities, the water had to travel thousands of kilometers across the desert, which meant that other areas had to accept having less. In rural regions and nomadic communities, access to water was always unstable. When groundwater levels dropped or supplies were redirected, livestock died of thirst, pastures dried up, and traditional livelihoods gradually collapsed. People were forced to abandon their lands, triggering silent waves of migration toward the coastal cities. At this point, water was no longer just a natural resource. It became the fragile line between survival and collapse, between holding on to one's homeland or being forced to leave in search of life elsewhere. When water was unevenly distributed between cities and rural areas, the first impacts were felt not only in people's lives, but also visibly marked some of Libya's oldest symbols of survival. For thousands of years, the date palm has been a pillar of life in this land. Each oasis was not just a patch of green in the desert, but a miniature ecosystem where the shade of date palms retained soil moisture and made it possible for other crops, insects, and small animals to thrive. Without water, date palms cannot survive. But more importantly, without date palms, oases themselves cannot exist. When groundwater levels declined or supplies were interrupted, date palm groves were among the first to suffer. The trees didn't die immediately. They withered gradually, yields dropped, the soil dried out, and the entire oasis ecosystem began to collapse. The great man-made river brought hope of reviving agriculture and stabilizing livelihoods in the interior. But as the water flow became less reliable, that hope grew fragile too. For many other countries, dates may just be an imported fruit. But for Libya, they are the foundation of livelihood, the reason people have managed to hold on in the middle of the Sahara Desert. And when water becomes uncertain, this symbol of life begins to falter as well. After 2011, when Libya fell into the spiral of civil war, water quickly took on a far more dangerous role, a tool for controlling people. In a country where most life depends on groundwater and an artificial pipeline system, whoever controls the water holds real power. Pumping stations became strategic targets. Sections of the pipeline were seized or sabotaged. Water supplies were cut off, not due to scarcity, but as a means of exerting political pressure on opposing cities and communities. For civilians, the consequences were immediate. Dry taps, paralyzed daily life, disrupted agriculture, and yet another wave of migration began. In Libya, water, something that should be neutral and life-sustaining, was turned into a silent weapon, deepening the already existing fractures within society. In Libya, the tragedy of water lies not only in its scarcity, but in how it arrives at the wrong time, in the wrong place, and in the wrong way. After years of water being controlled, restricted, and weaponized during conflict, the country now faces a cruel paradox. Devastated by drought, yet also overwhelmed by excess water. In some coastal cities, poor management and deteriorating infrastructure have caused groundwater levels to rise abnormally. Unclean water seeps up from underground, turning homes, streets, and gardens into stagnant, muddy swamps. People are forced to live with a silent but persistent kind of flooding. Not from rain, but from the breakdown of the water system itself. Then in 2023, nature struck directly. Storm Daniel brought an extremely rare amount of rainfall, causing the dams upstream of Derna to collapse. A massive torrent of water and mud swept through the city overnight, taking the lives of over 4,000 people and leaving tens of thousands homeless. In an arid country, water should have been salvation. But in Libya, it arrived in the form of disaster. That is the nation's bitterest paradox, where a lack of water kills slowly, and an excess of it destroys in an instant. After the floods and the abnormal rise in groundwater levels, another threat began to emerge. Less violent than flash floods, but far more persistent and dangerous. Stagnant water in homes, ditches, gardens, and coastal residential areas quickly became an ideal breeding ground for mosquitoes. Within just a few days, eggs hatched. Within weeks, areas that were once normal living spaces had turned into hotspots for the spread of disease-carrying insects. Under normal conditions, drainage systems, environmental management, and public health infrastructure could contain this threat. But in Libya, prolonged conflict has severely weakened those lines of defense. When mosquito populations surged, the already fragile healthcare system was quickly overwhelmed. Diseases like malaria, dengue fever, and other mosquito-borne illnesses began to reappear in areas where they had been under control for years. For the people, this was a new layer of suffering piled atop old losses. After their homes were damaged by water, they were forced to live in cramped, unsanitary temporary shelters, where the risk of disease spread was constant. Water, once essential for life, had now become a source of fear and insecurity, showing that the water crisis doesn't end with infrastructure or the environment, but cuts straight into public health. Libya's great man-made river is a marvel, but also a warning. Humanity can move water across the desert, but it cannot ignore the limits of nature and governance. Libya shows the world that water is power, and when that power is mismanaged, the cost can be immense. In the 21st century, as droughts and floods grow more extreme, Libya's story is no longer just Libya's. It's a lesson every nation, including the United States, must confront. What are your thoughts on this issue? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss future journeys with Terran Works.